Tara Taylor's going to be at Pittard all day with their grade levels. Like,
who's going to be at Pittard?
Tara Taylor. She's the data woman.
Oh.
Hey, Michael! 5, 3. Birthday for the rebuilding. I won't do that. Okay, I won't do that.
I understood it was dance on the tables.
Hey, Kim dances on the tables. Are you ready?
I offered to tell jokes.
I forgot to tell you about that. Hello, and welcome to For Further Review. My guest this evening is a new person to Murfreesboro City Schools. Her name is Kim Franks, and she is our coordinator of behavioral support. So I want to welcome her to Murfreesboro and to this program.
Thank you.
Good
happy
to have
to
you
be here.
Good. Well, I'm happy to have you here, that's for sure. Your title, Coordinator of Behavioral Support, talk us a little bit about what you do, but could you give us a little bit about your background and why you would be appropriate for working with behaviors?
Well, I've worked in education for about 32 years. I started out as a special education teacher, have taught all age children, school-age children from age 3 through 22 over those years, children who had significant disabilities, all the way through gifted, children who were gifted. But over the last number of years that I worked in the school district, I gravitated towards children with autism. I have a friend that says that I really like order and children with autism really need order, and so it's kind of a match made in heaven. But I find them to be really interesting individuals, and to just have a lot of success with them in the classroom, so much so that when I had an opportunity to go to Vanderbilt University and work for TRIAD, which is the Treatment and Research Institute for Autism Spectrum Disorders, I took advantage of that opportunity, and I've been there the last 9.5, since 2004, so eight plus years. So.
The word autism is a word that we hear a lot, and we seem to be hearing a lot more. But I'm not sure that we understand exactly what that means. So could you share with our audience, and with me, frankly, what are we talking about when we talk about autism?
Well, when we talk about autism, we're talking about a neurodevelopmental disorder that is evident by 18 months, 24 months. We can reliably screen children as early as 18 months. And it's manifests by 3 primary characteristics. The most important one, and the one that separates it from other developmental disabilities, is the social aspect of autism. We teach parents that a lot of children will rock and spin, which is one of the things that parents tend to notice. But the thing that sets autism apart is the lack of relating to others. The classic example is the lack of shared attention. So if you are outside with a child who had a language delay, and a hot air balloon went overhead, maybe the first time this child has ever seen a hot air balloon, even without language, the child would look up at the hot air balloon and then they would look at you. What they're saying without words is that there's something really fascinating going on in my environment. Do you see it too? So it's that shared enjoyment. Sometimes you'll hear that called joint attention. It's also that they're looking at this new thing in their environment, and they're looking to the adult or to the other person in the environment to kind of gauge that person's response, and I can learn how to respond based on what your response is. So in young children with autism, that's very often a red flag. Substitute other things, obviously, for the hot air balloon. But it's that lack of shared attention and shared enjoyment that really, really separates young children with autism from young children who have other developmental disabilities. But the three primary characteristics are that social piece, a communication piece, and then some kind of restricted, repetitive interest or activity. In young children, that looks like a very rigid play. So whereas other children might, take the banana and talk on the banana as if it were a telephone, a child with autism is probably not going to have that kind of imaginative play. A banana is for eating, and it's not for anything else. Or they might learn one way to play with the little barn animals and the little Fisher-Price barns that we all had. And if you watched them one time, you would think, oh, that looks good. But if you watched them over a period of time, you would see that they always do exactly the same thing. Like the cow and the pig, they never take vacation together, or they never eat out of each other's, areas. It's very, very rigid, very, very limited as far as creativity play. And that would be another early red flag for children with autism. Joint attention, limited play, lack of eye contact, so that we would call that social referencing. We give each other a lot of information through our facial expressions, and those of us who talk all the time with our hands, through our gestures. And children with autism don't use those as often, and they also don't read them from others as often. One of the things that I really stress with a little bit older children, that's young children, with older children is if I don't have the ability to read your facial expression, if I really struggle to interpret your gestures, then I'm going to have a really difficult time knowing what you're thinking. I mean, we are really good at reading one another, and kind of guessing what the other person might be thinking. And that's a really important skill. It helps us because if I can kind of read your body language and make guesses about what you're thinking, I can make pretty accurate predictions about what you're going to do next. And then I can adjust my behavior in response to those predictions. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. If I don't have the ability to read your facial expressions and to read your gestures, then I'm not going to have a good idea of what you're thinking, and I'm not going to be able to predict what you might do next. And everything you do then is like a surprise to me. One of the things that we see most often with children with autism is that they have a lot of difficulty with transitions. And I think that some of that has to do with that ability to interpret the social world and make good guesses about what might happen next. And so my response is to want to be rigid or to try to impose order in a world where I don't see that there is much order. And I think that a lot of that comes back to that inability to take another person's perspective, which I think then is influenced by just that lack of ability to read other people. I told you, I think autism is fascinating. I really do.
You mentioned several things there that that I was thinking about in a school setting. Obviously, a school setting is a very social environment. It is not necessarily structured, and there are a lot of transitions. So it would seem that one of the things that we will be doing in Murfreesboro City is a lot of teacher training. Not that our teachers are doing anything wrong, but just the knowledge of autism, and we are seeing an increasing number, not just in our school district, but across the United States. Could you talk a little bit about the role of a teacher or the role of an adult in a setting like a school, and what adjustments there might need to be for that school environment, for that teacher, what kind of knowledge that she or he would need? Could you address it a little bit from an adult standpoint dealing with autistic children?
Sure. I think one of the most important things is for us to train teachers about autism. I think if I understand as a teacher why this child might be doing some of the things that they're doing, I will respond to that in a different way. I won't think, oh, this is just a bad student. I'll think this is a child who has autism. And the autism, it's not an excuse, but it does let us know kind of why the student might respond to some of the things they do. So we need to train people just so that they can understand those behaviors. That would be number one. But number two, when we look at behavior, and now we're crossing over into that part, when we look at behavior, if we only focus on the behavior, then we're focused on the child. So we need to focus on what happens before that behavior occurs and what do we do after that behavior, because we can change those things. And those are things for children with autism like increasing the level of environmental structure, increasing what we do as far as visual support. So if I have a language delay, you telling me over and over again what to do is probably not going to help. So I need you to use another way to communicate. And oftentimes we use visual supports for children with autism. So for a daily routine, that might be some kind of visual schedule. It could be a picture schedule for a young child, but it could also just be a printed list, a printed checklist of things that child would do. That way they're not having to interpret our behavior to notice a change. They can see it on a printed list. So those kinds of things where we add structure into the environment to help provide for that student that order that they need. Now the goal is that at some point they will be able to do that for themselves. A long time ago I went to church with a little boy that I knew because it was really important for his family to go to church. And so I went to Sunday school with him. And it was really difficult to go to Sunday school with him and do that intervention because I had to ask his Sunday school teacher every day, what are we going to do today? And she would tell me, and I would write it down with a pencil, on a piece of paper. Over a year I thought, he can write. And so we taught him to go up to the teacher every day and say, what are we going to do today? And he started writing his own schedule and checking it off. So over time, and as the students' skills develop, they can kind of take on some of that responsibility for themselves. And that's really not different from what happened, as we developed. Students with autism just might need additional explicit training on that. So those are some examples. And then how we respond. Children learn sometimes things that we did not intend for them to learn. And learning, the definition that we're going to use for learning is any change in behavior as a result of experience. So sometimes I learn, the way to escape work is to rip up my paper. I ripped up my paper once and I didn't have to do the work. So nobody told me, you know what, Kim, if you don't want to do this work, just rip up the paper. But what I learned from that experience was that's one way to get out of work. So we have to think, how are we responding to some of these behaviors that our children demonstrate, and what are we teaching inadvertently? We have to be more explicit about that. And we have to think about how can the student get what they need, which could be attention, it could be escape from a really difficult task demand, but how can they get that in a more appropriate way and teach them that, and that'll be our goal. That'll be our goal, to teach teachers how to manipulate those variables.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the things that we talk about, Kim, here in Murfreesboro City is the whole child, and we're very committed to working with the whole child. Obviously, you have a huge role to play with that now. But could you talk a little bit about what you think it means to work with the whole child and to help the whole child? What does that term mean to you? Well,
it means that in addition to thinking about what their academic skill needs are, that we need to think about what their behavioral needs are and what their social needs are. When we have a student, and I think I shared this idea with you once before, but when we have a student who struggles academically, And I've seen this in Murfreesboro City just in the couple weeks that I've been here. When we have a student that struggles academically, we think about, okay, what does this say about the skills that we as educators need to teach this child? And then we put into place all of these very positive academic interventions. And it becomes a big part of that student's program, their educational program. Well, behavior is really the same. When we see that children struggle behaviorally, we can look at that and say, what does that tell us about their social skills? What skills is it that this student needs to learn to be more successful in their educational setting, in their home setting, in their community setting? And if we approach it in the same way and think about what does that behavior tell us that we need to teach this child to do socially and behaviorally, then I think we put ourselves in a positive situation to help with that skill acquisition. And I think when we're looking at academics, we're looking at social, we're looking at behavior, we're looking at the whole, what children need to learn to be fully developed and well-rounded.
Kim Frank, we're awfully glad that you're here.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
We thank you so much for your support of your children. We thank you for your support of Murfreesboro City Schools. Have a good evening.